I grew up just outside of one of those classic American national parks, the kind with endless pines, postcard-worthy mountains, and plenty of local stories. The only thing that sets us apart is that every October, like clockwork, the rangers shut down one trail for exactly 5 days. Black Pine Trail. Officially, the signs and brochures say it's for seasonal animal migration patterns. Nobody in town really buys it, and around here, we call the 5 days the closure. If you ask older people about it directly, they get weird fast. I'm serious. You'll see grown adults completely change their tune once that trail is mentioned in any capacity. The only person I know of who talks about it with little to no apprehension is my grandfather, an ex-park ranger. It's been this way since I was on the job, he'd say. Some folks went missing on the trail around the same time, and soon after, the signs went up every season. Most people in my generation think it's just small-town superstition, the kind of thing people invent out of boredom to scare each other and get tourists to buy shirts at a gift shop. I was the same, but I don't think that anymore. Not after what happened when some friends and I decided to go on that trail during the closure. There were 4 of us who decided to look into the stories and legends surrounding the closure. It was me, my friends Eli and Mara, and my cousin, Connor. Although it was Eli who pushed us into actually going. He'd found a bunch of old forum posts about the trail closure after spending the night with my grandfather and me, and got obsessed with the idea that the park was hiding something. Illegal dumping, cult activity, secret wildlife relocation. He had whacked out theories for everything. 3 weeks before the trip, he sent us a thread from some dead forum. The title was, "Anyone know why Black Pine Trail really closes?" Most of the replies were jokes. Government spy elk. Secret military base. Meth lab in the woods. But a few weren't joking. One comment just said, "My uncle was an eco-consultant there in the 90s. He quit after 1 season working there." Another said, "The reason they keep people out is that they're waiting for something to leave." That one stuck with him. From there, he dug through archive news articles and found missing persons cases loosely tied to the area. He even drove up the park twice to question rangers. They, of course, told him to get lost. Unlike Eli, Connor thought this whole idea was hilarious. My cousin had been a bit wild since forever. A troublemaker, with the scars to prove it. Literally. You can still see the knife scar above his belly button from back in high school. Luckily, he grew out of it after military school. Or, that's what he convinced everyone was the case. "This is either going to be the coolest thing we've ever done," he said while stuffing beef jerky into his backpack, "or we're going to find out park rangers are covering up some type of unethical animal breeding experiment." Eli snorted. "Protected by black budget park rangers." Connor nodded solemnly. "They probably wear night vision goggles to watch." Mara snickered, but it sounded forced. Nervous. That should have tipped me off. Mara wasn't paranoid. She was practical. The kind of person who brought extra batteries for everyone because she knew we'd forget them. If she got anxious, there was usually a reason. Still, Eli kept pushing, and we all caved. We got to the park around 4 in the afternoon. The sky was overcast, with low gray clouds hanging over the mountains. Black Pine Trail itself, however, sat near the northern end of the park, farther from the tourist areas and campgrounds, so there weren't many people around even during normal months. But during the closure, nobody. We could tell we were at the right place because there was a barricade that stretched across the trailhead with bright orange signs zip-tied to it. It said, "Trail closed, authorized personnel only." Someone had also scratched words into the wood beneath the sign, "Please don't stay after dark." Connor grinned. "Okay, That's some commitment to the bit. Eli looked real excited and started taking pictures. Mara and I just stared at the forest. Seems like we both felt unnerved. You guys notice how quiet it is? And that was why. There was little to no sound as soon as we reached the tree line near the trail. No birds, no bugs, just this weird, dead stillness. Undeterred by Mara's words, however, Connor decided to hop the barricade. "Well," he said, "no point in just standing around, right?" Seeing how we were already there, and Eli was already jumping over the barrier, Mara and I followed suit. The trail itself started normally enough. A bunch of trail pines lined along a rocky dirt path with occasional wooden trail markers. It was really serene, apart from the deafening silence, which still had me bothered. It felt like the deeper we went, the more the forest swallowed sound. Conversations died quickly because speaking loudly suddenly felt wrong somehow. At one point, Eli clapped his hands loudly just to test the echo, and Connor started whistling loudly to annoy Mara and me. It worked quite well. After about an hour of constant talking, we decided to take a break and eat some of the snacks we brought. Mara, Connor, and I took a seat next to an old trail marker that had some wooden stump seats around it. Eli, however, said he wasn't too tired, and he'd scout ahead. A few minutes later, we heard him shout out, "Guys, come check this out." Concerned, we all stood and went to catch up with him. About another half a mile in, we found Eli standing next to a still-running Ranger truck taking pictures. It sat crooked beside the trail, as if somebody had parked in a hurry, and the driver's side door was open. Connor approached first. "What the?" "What?" I asked, rushing over. He pointed at the side of the vehicle. Deep scratches gouged through the paint. 4 parallel lines ran from the hood to the back door. The metal around them had curled outward slightly. "What do you think did this? A bear?" "That doesn't look like a bear's claw to me," Mara answered. Failing to notice our concern, Eli started to climb halfway into the truck, much to my displeasure. "Let me see if I can find some ID or something," he said, now reaching into the back seat. "Wait, we shouldn't..." The radio inside crackled suddenly. All of us jumped in response, and Eli retreated from the vehicle's interior. Static hissed through the speaker for several seconds. Then a voice broke through briefly. "Northridge." More static. "Don't let..." Silence. Then came a knock. Talk. A sharp and thick bang came from somewhere deeper in the trees. Connor looked upward. Maybe it was a woodpecker. Then the sound again. Another knock answered closer. Then another. Mara stepped closer to me. "I think we should head back to the parking lot." I nodded in agreement, but our 2 other friends looked displeased. Eli was especially upset by our apprehension to continue. "What? Come on. We've barely gotten anywhere. The trail is still another 10 miles long. Don't let some random noises get to you." We looked to Connor for his input, hoping he'd agree with us. All he did, however, was shrug and say, "I mean, we can keep going for a bit, but we should watch out for animals. I'd rather not end up like the side of that truck." We pleaded with them to reconsider, but Eli was unshakable in his misguided determination. Mara and I stood there for a bit, torn on what to do. We could go back by ourselves, or we could stay together as a group. We chose the latter. The shoes started appearing about another half hour later. At first it was one pair of muddy running shoes hanging from a branch over the path. Connor chuckled nervously. "I didn't know gangs could claim national park territory. Maybe there actually is a meth lab." But then we saw another. Then dozens. Hundreds. Some brand new, some rotted to nothing. Even a tiny pink rain boot 20 feet up. Tangled next to a hiker's boot, coated in dried blood. Mara stopped cold. No, nope, we're leaving. Eli, for once, looked shaken too. Yeah, that's seriously messed up. Even worse was that tucked into a small grotto nearby, we found a abandoned campsite. While looking around, we found what was probably the tent hanging shredded between trees. On top of that, there were coolers split open, and various lawn chairs were tossed around. Connor took a look at the fire pit, crouching beside it. This hasn't been here long, he concluded. I looked to Mara, who was captivated by something near the opposite end of the campsite. I joined her, asking what was wrong. That's when I noticed it. A child-sized sleeping bag was partially dragged into the woods. Inside was the other pink rain boot. That's it. Eli, I'm heading back. This is messed up, Mara said, walking back and pressing her finger into Eli's chest. Eli seemed ready to argue, but before he got the chance, a whistle echoed from the trees. Oddly enough, it sounded like Connor's whistling. Perfectly so. But that couldn't be, since Connor was standing right next to us. We all stared at each other, and as Eli began to speak, another whistle came even closer, followed by a low, wet laugh. At this point, we were all genuinely freaked out, even if it was just a weird animal out there, or it was a person messing with us. We didn't want to stick around to find out. Connor was now soundly against moving on, so Eli had no choice but to join us in heading back to the car. But unfortunately for us, the sun had started to go down, so we decided to camp one night and leave at first light. This would be the worst decision of our lives. I know that camping out there during the closure sounds stupid, but at the time it felt reasonable. We were already miles in, and darkness was setting fast. Besides, none of us wanted to hike out with the limited light from our flashlights, especially with whatever could be out there. We made camp beside a narrow creek surrounded by dense pine. There was no way we were going to stay at the wrecked campsite. That place was creepy as hell. Nobody wandered far from the fire. Connor tried joking a few times, but nothing landed. Eli kept scanning the tree line with his flashlight, now looking more scared than any of us. Mara barely spoke at all. At one point she quietly said, "Have any of you seen animals since we got here?" Nope, not one. Other than the truck, knocking, and whistling, there was no evidence of another living being in these woods. But it didn't stay that way for long. That's because around midnight, I woke to movement. At first I thought someone from our group was up, so I shuffled and looked around. It was none of my friends, however. They were all still asleep in their sleeping bags. I panned my vision to the surrounding area, and that's when I heard slow footsteps from just outside the firelight. I sat up slowly. Across from me, Connor shot awake too. He heard it too, and started to unzip his sleeping bag so he could try to investigate. The footsteps stopped, and when they did, so did Connor. Then something landed beside the fire. A pebble. A few seconds later, another pebble hit Eli's backpack. Then another. Soft little tosses, like someone trying to get our attention. I felt the need to do something, so I reached for my backpack, grabbed my flashlight, aiming it into the woods. "Who's there?" Nothing. Then from the darkness came Connor's whistle again, echoing from just out of the flashlight's line of sight, followed by a little girl's voice. "Hello?" After hearing that, Connor was no longer frozen because he began to back himself toward Eli as fast as he could. Dude, wake up. Something's out there." Eli groggily opened his eyes. What? What are you talking about?" He paused and pointed before continuing. "What is that?" Then we saw it. A shape high in the trees, much too large to be human. It was crouched among the branches, watching us with vacant, shining eyes. It grinned down with long, pale teeth stretched far too wide across its face. Mara woke up now from the commotion, immediately locking eyes with this thing, and screamed. Hearing Mara's shrill howling, we all broke eye contact with it and looked at her. Realizing my mistake, I turned my gaze as fast as I could to the tree line. But it was gone. Then came the knocking again. We had to get out of there. Now. We packed in under 2 minutes, leaving half of our supplies behind, and started down the trail. But we'd soon realized that something was off about it. For some reason, maybe because of how dark it was, the path no longer looked familiar. Landmarks like the trail markers or busted up campsite were missing. Connor kept checking the GPS device he brought. No signal, and I don't have the coordinates of the entrance. Eli looked panicked now. I don't understand. We went straight. We literally just went straight. That's how a trail works. Suddenly, in the dead of the night, we heard something that brought our frantic scrambling to a halt. Help! Human screaming. A man's voice. Reverberated off to our right. I recognized it. That's the ranger. From the truck radio. We gotta help him, Connor said, moving towards the scream. Mara grabbed his arm hard. What? No. We don't know what's out there. Someone has to. Besides, maybe he knows how to get out of here. Connor, don't. Help me. Closer now. Desperate. Connor, clearly scared, still found the bravery to rip free from Mara's grip and run into the trees before anyone could stop him. Eli hesitated for a moment before rushing after him, with Mara and me following behind, as we didn't want to be alone. We found Connor's flashlight first, just 50 or so yards in, still on, lying crooked in the dirt. I crouched down to examine the flashlight, while the others searched around for any sign of my cousin. However, while inspecting the light, something trickled from above and landed on my head. I looked up, squinting my eyes, and once again, I felt a drop hit me, this time on my face. I wiped it away and pointed Connor's flashlight up towards whatever was dripping. Oh, God. Connor. Hanging amongst the tree branches was one of Connor's boots. Fresh blood smeared on the laces. Before the others could look up at what I found in the dark just ahead of us, we heard Connor laughing. Eli looked elated and said, Connor, we're over here. What happened to you? Did you find the ranger? The laughing just continued, but the longer it went, the more off it sounded. It was as if something was physically pulling apart his voice as it moved between trees impossibly fast. Closer, farther, then closer again, until it was right in front of us. I looked at Eli and then Mara and uttered one word. Run. We ran in the opposite direction for what felt like hours. We could hear large and cracking footsteps breaking branches behind us at all times. Whatever this thing was, it was fast enough to keep up with us, and I was starting to think it was a lot faster. We eventually spotted a clearing in the trees ahead. We passed through it, hoping to get our bearings, but again, nothing looked familiar. This was when the creature came fully into view. Moonlight hit past the clearing, just enough to illuminate it between the trees. It was tall, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its arms hung low enough that its fingers brushed the ground, and its skin, God, the skin. It looked like a patchwork of different skin tones, going from fair to dark, and stretched tightly over visible ribs and joints. The legs bent slightly backward when it moved, almost like a flamingo, but its head tilted slowly as it watched us. Curious. Patient. Then it smiled again. Its lips stretched and peeled, trying to get its mouth to open more and more. Mara whispered, "Oh my God." It seems like she noticed what I, too, would soon come to notice. Along this thing's neck, leading up to the chin, was a familiar looking scar above an outie belly button. It was wearing Connor's skin. Hearing Mara's fearful whisper, it clicked and contorted. There was a violent jerking motion, then another, and with no other warning, it skulked towards us, launching itself forward in horrible, uneven bursts. The only thing I can relate it to is a spider wading across water. We were once again on the run. Behind us, I could hear impacts slamming into the ground as it chased us through the woods, but it never fully committed to chasing us. It kept circling, passing us, disappearing, reappearing ahead. It was as if it were toying with us, as if we were mice being chased by a cat. At one point, Eli screamed because something brushed his shoulder in the dark. When I looked back, I saw its pale fingers retracting behind a tree, along with a deep, inhuman cackle. Then it used Connor's voice again. "Guys, wait up." So badly I wanted to stop running, to look back and see my idiot cousin running with us. But I knew it was just that vile monster, mocking us. By pure luck, we crashed into an old ranger station. It was a tiny wooden cabin hidden amongst dense trees. The windows were shattered, and the door was hanging open. Needing a place to hide and rest, we had little to no qualms about rushing inside and proceeding to shove a cabinet against the entrance. The smell of the place hit first, a combination of mildew and something coppery. Old maps littered the floors, together with shattered equipment, and there were hundreds of tally marks covering the back wall. We waited for a while, trying to hear if our hiding spot was compromised, but after close to an hour, there was nothing. Seeing no other choice but to look around, we tried to find something that could help us. Eli went towards the back of the cabin while Mara and I stayed closer to the front. "Hey Jess," I heard her say, "take a look at what I found." I hurried over to look, and it appeared to be a journal near a sideways desk. It had ranger logs stamped faintly across the front. Water damage ruined most of it, but some entries were readable. The handwriting changed throughout the journal too. The earlier entries looked neat and professional, while the later ones looked rushed, shaky. October 24th. Closure started this morning. The Northridge team reported hearing knocking again around 0500. 3 distinct impacts spaced evenly apart. No wildlife movement observed anywhere near the trail. Not normal. Again. October 25th. Found another shoe hanging near mile marker 6. Child sneaker this time. Blue. Still clean enough that it can't have been there long. We searched the surrounding area for remains or missing hikers. Nothing. Miller says we should stop documenting this stuff altogether. I disagree. October 25th, 21:30, 9:30 p.m. Heard it for the first time tonight. Thought it was Alvarez outside the station. Sounded exactly like him. He was standing beside me when we heard it call my name from the trees. October 26th. The entire forest feels dead. Alvarez refuses to patrol after dark now. Says he saw something crouched in the trees near the old fire road. Wouldn't describe it. Just kept repeating. It smiled at me. October 26th, 23:47, 11:47 p.m. Something circled the station for over an hour tonight. Slow footsteps. Stopped whenever we checked the windows. Started again the second we sat down. Miller heard knocking directly outside the wall. October 27th. It mimicked Alvarez tonight. Perfectly. We heard him yelling for help down near the creek. Miller almost went after him. Good thing he didn't, because Alvarez was already dead. We found pieces of him this morning hanging from branches near the ravine. Mostly clothing. One boot, still tied neatly by the laces. The next several pages were badly smeared, like someone had grabbed them with wet hands. Then another readable entry appeared farther in. October 28th. It watches the station constantly now. Saw it clearly for maybe 2 seconds through the trees. Tall with patched skin. Why does it move like that? It tilted its head when it saw me looking at it. Almost curious. I want to go home. October 28th, 8 p.m. It comes down from the North Ridge every year. That's why they close the trail. Not to keep people out, but to give it an empty forest so it moves on faster. If it finds someone or something during the migration, it plays with them first. It learns their voices, their sounds, their fears. I think it likes when people run. The final page had only one sentence written across it repeatedly over and over in uneven handwriting. It has my voice. It has my voice. It has my voice. Mara shut the book, looking up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "What are we gonna do?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hug her and pray we found a solution. It appeared my prayer did get answered as Eli shouted, "Hey!" He shoved aside a pile of moldy papers and crouched beside an old radio console bolted to the desk. It looked ancient, dust-covered. Half the switches were missing caps, and one side of the speaker grill had been dented inward. I shook my head. No way this old thing still works. He ignored me and got busy flipping switches, and suddenly static hit the room hard enough that Mara jumped back. "Holy Jesus Christ," she hissed. Eli snatched the microphone. Hello? Anybody there?" Nothing but static. He tried again. We're hikers on Black Pine Trail. We're lost and there's..." The radio spat, then snapped loud enough to make us all freeze. Someone answered. A voice came through, rough and buried under white noise. "This is Ranger Holt. Who is this?" All three of us stared at the radio. Eli nearly dropped the mic. "Oh my god. Okay. My name's Eli. We need help, right now." "You crossed the barricade?" Eli looked at me nervously. "Yeah. Listen carefully. Is it following you?" None of us answered right away. Then somewhere outside the station... Tuck. Mara flinched violently. "Yes." The ranger cursed quietly under his breath. "Alright, you need to head south immediately. There should be an emergency access road about 2 miles from your position." "How do we get there?" I asked, leaning toward the radio. "You got a map?" Eli nodded automatically before realizing the ranger couldn't see him. "Yeah." "Good. Write these coordinates down." I grabbed some dry paper scraps off the desk while Eli repeated the numbers aloud. The ranger spoke first, like he was in a hurry. 37.441 north, 119.77 west. Follow the ravine until... A soft electronic chirp cut him off. Beep. All three of us froze. Eli frowned. "What's that?" The sound came again. Beep, beep. Mara slowly turned toward me and my stomach dropped. I recognized the sound. Connor's GPS. It's still active somewhere nearby. Eli looked confused and asked, "What's wrong?" That's Connor's GPS. "So? We can put the coordinates on that instead of using a map." The beeping continued softly, closer this time. Mara whispered, "Connor had it." Another beep sounded, then the ceiling creaked, causing dust to rain down right above us. Over the radio, Ranger Holt suddenly shouted, "Get out of the cabin now!" Something slammed onto the roof hard enough to shake the entire station. Mara screamed. Then came the knocking directly overhead. It kept going relentlessly as another impact slammed into the roof. Eli grabbed my arm. "Back door, now." We didn't have time to think about it. As the second we got to the door, something crashed through the rafters. Wood exploded inward, and pale limbs unfolded through the darkness inside the cabin. It had gotten stuck, giving us our opportunity to run. Eli practically ripped the back door off its hinges trying to get outside. Behind us, the cabin exploded with noise. Wood splintering, glass shattering, and underneath all of it, laughter. A mix of all the voices it had collected over its long life of stalking and killing. I glanced back once before we crossed the tree line. Something dark and lanky unfolded itself through the broken roof. Its long limbs bent at impossible angles as it tore through the cabin, and its head snapped at attention towards us. The game was over. There was no more hiding, just a wild pursuit. Branches tore across our faces as we sprinted downhill through the dark. Nobody knew where we were going anymore. The trail was gone, leaving only trees that covered the moonlight, forcing us to rely on our dim flashlights to guide us. It didn't take long for it to catch up to us now that it wasn't playing with us anymore. In fact, I was just able to glance over and catch a glimpse of its haunting visage rushing through the canopy. Mara kept her eyes on it too, and seemed to realize something. "It keeps pushing us left," she yelled. She was right. Every time we turned, it beat us there, shoving us in another direction, like it knew exactly where we'd end up. Then a voice echoed through the woods ahead. "Kids." We all froze instinctively. "Kids, over here." A flashlight beam appeared next, sweeping the trees. For one horrible second, I actually believed it was Ranger Holt. I thought we made it. Mara screamed out in glee, weeping as she ran closer to the light. "Wait, Mara!" We heard a sickening thud. She'd fallen into an inlet hidden under leaves and mud. For a moment she was still moving, trying to crawl back up the bank. But then the flashlight stopped moving. It slowly tilted sideways and the voice came again. "I'm here." There was a long pause between each word. Too long. "I'm here." Then the light blinked out and the monster landed beside her on all fours. It had used Connor's light to trick us. Noticing the darkness now enveloping Mara, we quickly turned our lights in her direction and saw its arms wrapped around her body as it continued to speak broken and disjointed words. Mara screamed my name as a long finger covered her mouth. Unable to think rationally, I slid halfway down the bank trying to reach her, but was stopped as Eli grabbed my jacket. I extended my hand and for 1 second, our fingers actually touched, but I was too late. The creature jerked backward violently, and Mara disappeared into the dark so fast it nearly pulled me down with her. I can still hear it. The dragging of her body, along with the horrible wet laughing between her muffled screams. The sounds moved deeper into the woods, gradually, like the thing wanted us to try and follow. I probably would have too, if Eli hadn't held me down when I tried to move. "Don't!" He screamed directly into my face. "Please, Jess, you can't die too." All I could do was scream and cry as he continued to press me against the floor. He started to cry as well. Despite the immediate danger surrounding us, we sat for a few minutes and wept. But our grieving was interrupted by Mara's voice, now ringing out from the forest. "Guys?" We both froze. "Guys, wait for me." The voice sounded exactly like hers, but there was no panic in it anymore. She giggled softly as another voice answered from farther away. "Connors." "You coming?" Then both combined into one as the mimic started bellowing in the dark once more. We reached the trailhead at dawn. For whatever reason, after Mara was taken, it stopped chasing us. To this day, I don't know why. Maybe it was full. If it ate whatever it caught, or perhaps it had its fun and wasn't interested in us anymore. 3 park rangers, along with Ranger Holt, stood beside the barricade waiting for us, armed to the teeth and blaring their cars' sirens to the max. As soon as we passed the tree line, both Eli and I collapsed to the ground, exhausted. We had to be carried to their cars, and all the while they bombarded us with questions about what happened and what we saw. When we finally reached the vehicles, Holt asked, "How many of you went on the trail?" Eli couldn't answer. I barely could. 4, I whispered. He lowered his eyes briefly as another ranger muttered, "Better than last year." I'll never forget that sentence. Better than last year. They've done this before, and by how they acted, it's been a routine for a long time. When we tried to ask questions of our own, they refused to answer. At one point, Eli started screaming at them, "What is that thing?" Once again, no answer. As we drove away, I found myself looking back through the rear window toward the tree line. I wish I hadn't. It was there, peeking half hidden between the pines, smiling with an arm outstretched as if it were waving. Its chest rose and fell quickly, satisfied. And what made me once again start crying was that it was holding Mara's backpack, lifting it to and fro with every shift of its hand. The official story hit local news 2 days later. 2 hikers missing during illegal trespassing incident. Possible bear attack. Search efforts suspended due to weather conditions. That was it. Connor and Mara were declared legally missing, and the trail reopened after the 5-day closure period ended. Eli and I barely talk now. After what happened, we just couldn't face one another. We saw each other at school mostly, but last month he moved to Arizona with his family. Years later, I still hear things at night. I know it's all in my head, but I swear I can hear whistling and knocking at my window while I try to sleep. So, all of this leads to why I decided to post this in the first place. Well, I've been hearing about a group planning to host an event out on the trail to protest deforestation and construction on protected land. This usually wouldn't be a problem, but here's the thing. It's October, and Black Pine Trail closes again tomorrow. No matter what anyone tells you, please know that my wife is dead. We had been married for 4 years. She loved me enough to move halfway across the country with me. Leaving behind Maine and moving to a small rural town in South Dakota was difficult for her, but she grew to love our quiet peace of nowhere. Jess loved the slower pace of life that South Dakota granted, and so did I. It allowed me to focus more on our relationship. I nearly lost Jess once before. In college, my drinking got so bad that I stopped recognizing the man in the mirror. She stayed anyway. She helped me get sober. She gave me a future when I deserved neither. It was her kindness and patience that got me through, and when our life in South Dakota began, I made a promise to myself that I would make the most of every moment I had with Jess. 2 weeks ago, Jess headed back to Maine for a weekend girls' trip with her sisters, since she hardly got to see her family anymore. I supported her decision to make the trip, though I told her I would miss her like crazy. She smiled, leaned in for a kiss, and said, "I'll be back before you know it." Less than an hour after she left, I got a call from my fishing buddy, Sheriff Miller. "Hey Sheriff, you want to get together tonight for some fishing? The wife is out of town, so I'm free," I answered casually. A sober voice responded, "Devin, I'm real sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but there's been an accident on Highway 9 by the intersection. I think you should come down here." My heart dropped as I hung up and headed out to Highway 9. As I approached, I saw the bright flashing lights of 4 police cars, 2 fire trucks, and 1 ambulance. My hands shook violently as I exited my car and jogged over to the scene. In the middle of the intersection, I could see a semi with its front end smashed in on itself, and smoke rising from its exposed engine. I walked up to Sheriff Miller. When he saw me, he removed his hat, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "Devin, I'm so sorry." In a panic, I glanced past him to the torn-up cornfield just off the road. In the middle of damaged and flattened corn stalks rested the crumbled remains of Jess's 2019 Subaru. I screamed and wept as I saw the paramedics walk a covered stretcher to the awaiting ambulance. Even beneath the sheet, I could tell that the body it carried was mangled and bent in ways unnatural for the human form. Weeping, I fell to the ground as the sheriff knelt next to me. He told me he knew how hard this is, but he really needed me to come with him to the medical examiners to positively identify the body. So he helped me to his car, and we both followed the ambulance. I sat in the hallway for what felt like hours before they called me back to view the body. Tears again filled my eyes as they lifted the sheet. It was her. It was my Jess. The crash had knocked one of her eyes loose in its socket, and her jaw was mangled and hung loose. But it was her. The next couple of days were a blur of conversations with the funeral home, the local pastor, and Jess's family, who took the first flight to South Dakota. The funeral was on Sunday afternoon. The whole town came. The pastor spoke about the value of life and the sadness of death. As the casket was lowered to the ground, I sat there staring into the void. Slowly, family and friends began to leave, but not me. I stayed. I watched the workers fill the grave. I watched the last of the dirt disappear beneath the setting sun. And when I finally drove home, I did so knowing one thing with absolute certainty. My wife was dead. It was dark when I got home. My parents and Jess's parents both begged me to come over to the hotel so that we could grieve together, but I told them I needed to be alone. In reality, I didn't want them to stop me from drinking away my pain. Several bottles later, I sat alone in the darkness of the living room, as drunk as could be, but still unable to forget. That's when I heard the front door unlock. It took me a moment to realize what I was hearing. It was the low jingle of keys followed by someone fumbling to fit the key in the lock. Then a loud click. Next, the front door swung open, flooding the entryway with moonlight. I stared through groggy eyes as a familiar silhouette filled the doorway. A voice I never thought I'd hear again said, "Why is it so dark in here?" before calling out for me. "Devin, are you home, honey?" I couldn't believe my eyes. This can't be her. "Who are you?" I said with slurred words. At that, she jumped slightly, startled by my words coming from the darkness. She turned on the hallway light and saw me in the chair. "What do you mean, who are you?" "It's me, your wife," she said playfully before following up with, "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I had no words. I simply stared at her in disbelief. Her eyes glanced down to the empty bottles on the floor, and a frown formed on her face. "Really, Devin? I leave for 3 days and you start doing this again? I thought we were past this." I slowly stood to my feet and took a wobbly step towards her. "I don't know who you are, but this isn't funny. Jess is dead. Leave me alone." "What are you talking about?" She said in an annoyed tone, "I'm not dead. I was visiting sisters, don't you remember?" I stumbled forward towards her. "Jess is dead." She laughed. "Okay, you've definitely had too much to drink. I literally talked to you from Bangor yesterday." "You're not real," I mumbled as my eyes grew foggy and I collapsed in a drunken stupor. The next morning I woke up with a splitting headache. I wasn't sure how I had gotten to bed, but I lay there staring up at the ceiling. The grief of the last few days returned, and I sighed as the reality of life without Jess returned. As I pulled myself out of bed, I told myself I would go over to my parents' hotel later that day. As I got dressed, I noticed a strange smell in the room, not the scent of alcohol that I expected. Instead, it smelled vaguely of rotting leaves and mold. I cracked open a window before heading downstairs. My whole body tensed up as I walked into the kitchen. And there stood Jess. She was humming to herself as she poured a cup of coffee. I swallowed hard before opening my mouth. Jess? She turned and smiled. It was her face, her bright blue eyes, her bright white teeth, and dirty blonde hair. In that moment, I didn't know what to believe. 3 days ago I looked into the same face, broken and lifeless. But now here she was smiling at me as if nothing had happened. "Morning," came her energetic voice. "I have to go into the office here shortly, but I made you some coffee and here's some aspirin. I'm sure you're feeling a bit hungover." All I could do was nod. "Last night wasn't great. We can talk about it later, but it doesn't have to be a big deal. Let's just move on." "Okay, sounds good," I managed to say. She walked by me to get to the garage. As she did, she kissed me on the cheek. Her lips were cold. "I love you," she said as she walked out the door. For a moment, I just stood there in the kitchen. My pounding headache made it even harder to understand what was going on. Had I, in a drunken state, imagined that my wife had died? No, I couldn't have. I was there. I smelled the burning flesh and saw the body. But if I wasn't imagining her death, then who was I talking to? It looked like Jess. It sounded like her too. My memories tell me that she is dead, but my eyes tell me that she's alive. So which one do I believe? Maybe someone else can tell me, I muttered aloud as I reached for the phone. "Hey, Devin." Sheriff Miller's jolly voice came through the phone. "You want to get together tonight for some fishing? The wife is working a late shift, and I get done around 5 if you're free." "Sheriff, it's Jess." "What about her?" "The accident." Silence. "Devin, what accident? Is Jess okay?" I could feel anger boiling within me. "What do you mean? You were there. Friday you called me to tell me she had died in an accident. We just buried her yesterday." He went silent again before saying, "Dev, are you feeling okay?" "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Well, what I mean is we didn't have a funeral this weekend. At least not one I was aware of. And the last lethal accident around here was the Harrison family last summer." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Miller continued in a lower tone. "Have you been drinking again? Look, if you need help, I'll give you the number of that rehab center in Middleton." Without another word, I ended the call. Next, I called my parents, and though I had seen them yesterday at the funeral, they claimed they hadn't left Maine in months. For the next hour, I scoured the internet, trying to find any news coverage of the accident, or an online obituary, but there wasn't any trace of the events of this last weekend anywhere online. I then found myself searching the house for the bulletin from the funeral service, or maybe one of the many "sorry for your loss" cards I had received. But there was nothing. No cards, no notes, not so much as a scrap of paper from the funeral home. Nothing. By noon I felt like I was losing my mind, and my last evidence of my wife dying could only be found at the funeral home, so I walked 4 blocks over to the funeral home. As I entered, I was greeted at the front desk by an elderly man wearing a 3-piece suit. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" He said in a shaky yet soothing voice. "Yeah, hi. I was wondering if I have ever done any business here." He raised one eyebrow and asked, "You've forgotten if you've done business with a funeral home?" Yeah. I was just wondering if you could check my name against your files." "Very well. What is your name?" After giving my name, he typed it into the computer and said, "It seems that this last Saturday you purchased 1 burial plot in the East Field. Is that ringing any bells?" I nodded. "Yeah, it is. Could you give me the lot number? I'd like to check that it's the one I wanted." He wrote it on a sticky note and handed it to me. I didn't really need the lot number. I knew exactly where Jess's grave was. I walked out into the East Field, but was shocked to find that the beautiful headstone that Jess's parents and I bought was no longer there. It was an empty lot. The ground had clearly been disturbed recently, but there was no headstone. I double-checked the number to be sure I was right, and it was. I found myself staring vacantly at the lot, and as I did, a small thought in the back of my mind began to grow. I must have made it up. By the time I walked home, it was nearing dinner time. As I approached my house, I saw Jess's Subaru in the drive, another detail disproved by memories. I took a deep breath and braced myself before walking inside. Seeing Jess still was a shock to my system. I could hear Jess. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she did in the morning. I could feel my heart beat faster as I walked. Jess had made herself dinner and was just about to start eating when she noticed me walking in. She gave me a wide smile and said, "Hey, how was your day?" This felt weird. I forced a smile. "It was good. How was yours?" "Incredible," she said as she turned to grab her plate. "What are you eating?" I asked awkwardly. "Oh, I needed some protein, so I cooked up a few of the steaks from the freezer," she replied as she took a greedy bite out of one of the steaks. I gazed at her uncomfortably before saying, "Jess, you're a vegetarian. You don't eat meat." At this, she stopped chewing for a moment and looked like a child looks when they're caught in a lie. We awkwardly stared at one another before she smiled and said, "Well, I'm just trying new things. Who knows? Maybe I'll become a carnivore instead." She laughed wildly with a mouthful of meat. "It's pretty good. You should try some." I shook my head, but she lifted the fork with a piece of steak to my mouth, pressing it gently against my closed lips. "Come on, you'll love it," she said with wide eyes. Reluctantly, I took a little nibble of the meat. "See? Isn't that so good?" The cheerfulness of her voice didn't match the violence of her eyes. For a while, she stared at me with her wide, unblinking eyes before turning and saying, "Well, that's enough for me. Time to go take a shower." I stayed downstairs until I heard the shower turn off. After gathering my courage, I walked up to the bedroom. In the master bath, Jess sat by the mirror in fresh pajamas, drying her hair. Her head turned to me as I walked in. I swallowed hard before asking, "Are you Jess?" Vacant eyes looked back at me before a toothy grin appeared. "I'm your wife," she replied. "That's not what I asked." She stared a moment longer before shrugging and turning back to the mirror. I turned and retreated to the basement, shutting the door behind me. I tried to calm my nerves with some TV. A few hours later, I finally felt brave enough to leave the basement. I might not want to sleep in the same room as her, but Jess acting weird wasn't going to keep me in the basement. I stood up from the couch and turned around. As I did, my blood froze. Directly behind the couch, standing as still as a statue, was Jess. I don't know how long she had been there. I hadn't heard the basement door open. She stood staring deep into my eyes, head slightly tilted to the right, with a gentle yet malicious grin on her face. "Oh, Jess, I hadn't heard you come down," I said nervously. Silence followed. "What are you doing down here?" she said in a melodic tone barely louder than a whisper. I had to get out of there. I was just about to watch some shows, but my boss called me saying they need me to cover the night shift, so I gotta go. She glared at me in silence for what felt like an eternity before replying, "Okay, I hope you have a good shift." She then turned to the side to allow me access to the stairs. As I walked up the stairs, I could feel her warm breath on my neck as she followed close behind. Trying to stay calm, I found my wallet and keys before saying, "Bye, honey." She didn't respond. I resisted the urge to run to my car. As I turned the key, I breathed a sigh of relief. The real Jess would have known that I had been out of work for months. I felt convinced that that wasn't my wife, but I had to be sure. Jess stood in the window watching me as I backed out and pulled away. I had to know. I had to know what happened to my wife, and what was now in my house. And only one place could give me answers. So I stopped at the local hardware store and bought a shovel. I then waited till 1 a.m. when I was sure no one was out. Parking a little ways away, I cautiously walked to the east field of the cemetery. Something was buried in my lot. There was no headstone, but the dirt had clearly been moved. So I started digging. It must have been past 3 a.m. when my shovel hit the hard concrete of a burial vault. My lot had something in it. I took the time to clear off the rest of the vault lid before climbing out of the grave to run back to my car for a sledgehammer. Within the hour, I was covered in sweat, but the majority of the vault cover was gone or loose. Beneath the smashed pieces of concrete, I could see a coffin. The same deep red oak coffin I had picked out for my wife 3 days ago. When the opening was big enough, I took the leap of no return and began smashing the beautiful box with the head of the shovel. As I punctured the lid, the odor of death escaped and I recoiled in disgust. After holding back vomit, I returned to work and pried the lid open. My eyes widened as I peered inside. Buried in my wife's casket was the mangled and deformed body of a decaying deer. Its limbs were twisted and broken to fit in the box. Its neck snapped and violently bent to the side. Its lifeless eyes were foggy, and maggots crawled every inch of the carcass. On one of its antlers, it wore a ring. It was my wife's wedding ring, though it was covered with dried blood and fur. It was still as beautiful as the day I gave it to her. I don't remember the drive back to the house. I only remember standing in the driveway before dawn, staring at the kitchen light glowing through the curtains. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I went inside. The house smelled stronger now. Wet earth, rotting leaves. Something dug up and left in the sun. Jess was sitting at the kitchen table. She wasn't eating. She wasn't reading. She was simply waiting. Her eyes followed me as I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked down at my hand, at the wedding ring. The smile slowly faded from her face. "Oh," she said quietly. The single word sounded more disappointed than angry. I took a step backward. "What are you?" I whispered. She tilted her head. The movement went too far, her neck bending several inches past what should have been possible. "I'm your wife." "No." For the first time since she'd appeared, she stopped smiling entirely. Something dark moved behind her eyes, but the voice tried to be kind. "You weren't supposed to dig." The voice was almost hers. Almost. I backed toward the door. She made no effort to stop me. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and watched. As I reached the doorway, she spoke one last time. "Devin?" I froze. "When you get lonely enough," a grin stretched across her face, "you'll come back." I left and never looked back. Since then, I've tried to move on. I'm working part-time in a new city in a different state. My wife is gone even though no one believes me. I'm both grieving and terrified because every now and then I get voicemails from unknown numbers. It's the same message every time. In the voice of my wife, barely holding back laughter, the thing says, "Devin, when are you coming home?" If you are camping in Baxter State Park and you see trees marked with red paint, please pack your bags and leave before it's too late. Let me preface this by saying I'm not the one who believes in cryptids or supernatural stuff. I want to believe that there is a logical explanation for what happened to me and my friend, but for the life of me, I can't find a rational answer. I've been camping since I was a kid, but now I can't find the courage to go back into the wilderness ever again. I'm a pretty experienced camper. I love traveling to different parks and staying out there for 4 to 5 nights at a time. My friend Aaron and I had planned on staying 5 nights in Baxter State Park in Maine. Aaron is also very experienced and has gone with me on countless previous trips. He knows these particular woods better than I do, so when he picked a spot pretty far off from any trails, I didn't question his decision. We chose a spot near a tree that was marked with red spray paint. We planned to leave the site every day to go hiking, so the paints made it an easy landmark that would help us locate our campsite. The campsite was in a small open field about 30 yards north of the tree with red paint. The first night was completely fine. We hiked out to a nice fishing spot and then headed back to camp when the sun was setting. I distinctly remember passing the painted tree on the way back. Unfortunately, this was the last normal experience I'd have in that forest. Later that night, I woke up to the sound of what seemed like a tree about to fall. I could hear the cracking of branches followed by loud creaking noises. The odd part was that there was no thud. It's as if the tree never hit the ground. What made it weirder was that the forest still seemed to be rustling, although now more faint. I could still hear the cracking of branches and lots of commotion. I was still half asleep, so I chalked it up to there just being a large animal making noise. In the morning, we went out on another hike. As we left camp, I glanced around for any recently fallen trees, just to be sure. There was nothing. We continued with our day as usual, until deciding to cut it short and head back in order to prepare dinner. On the way back, we couldn't spot the tree with red paint. It was odd, but we still managed to make our way back to camp based on memory. Aaron was more confused by the absence of the tree than I was. He kept going on about how he was certain the path he had us on would have taken us right by the tree. To confirm, he walked back over to the location of the tree, but it was nowhere to be seen. When he told me this, I thought he must have missed it, so I also investigated. Sure enough, the tree wasn't anywhere to be seen. I trust our spatial awareness, and I wholeheartedly believe we were in the exact spot where the tree should have been. I remembered the sounds from the previous night having come from the direction of the tree, so I thought that maybe it was the one that had fallen over. However, after scanning the area, there was no sign of a fallen tree. It's as if the tree had just completely vanished. Although we were confused, we didn't keep looking for much longer and returned to the campsite and went to bed. Later, in the middle of the night, I was once again awoken by the same sounds. It sounded like the forest was moving. The sound of trees breaking and snapping was unnaturally loud. It was much louder than small branches snapping. It was like a whole trunk was being broken in two. I still told myself that it was just a large animal, most likely a bear. I should have investigated it to be sure, but it sounded distant, and I didn't want to risk an encounter with an animal. That morning we went hiking to another fishing spot nearby. This is when things got really strange. On our way back, we took the main trail and walked past an older couple who were also out camping. They saw our fishing gear and asked if we caught anything. We started having a pretty casual conversation, but the whole tone shifted when the husband brought up hearing trees fall in the night. It was their first night camping, and I told him that we had been hearing loud noises in the night for multiple days now. I asked him if he was able to find the fallen trees, but he said they couldn't find anything. Then I asked him what direction he heard it from. It was right over there, near the tree with red paint on it, he said as he pointed off toward the distant tree line. Aaron and I looked at each other with confusion and an uneasy feeling. It's very possible that multiple trees had been marked with paint in these woods. Maybe there was a logging scheduled soon. Despite all logical conclusions, both of us were put on edge by the mention of a tree with red paint. All 4 of us walked over to look for a fallen tree, but I was more interested in finding this tree with red paint. When we got closer, I asked the man where the tree with red paint was. In a confused tone, he said, "It should be right here. That's strange. Maybe I'm mistaken." His wife chimed in. No, it was definitely here. It was pretty easy to spot because of the bright red. Now things felt really off. What are the chances that 2 different groups spot a tree with red paint? and then both trees seemed to vanish into thin air. We continued on our hike to the fishing spot. On the way, all we could talk about was the tree with red paint. It was such a strange coincidence, and we couldn't figure out a logical explanation. Despite this, we tried to forget about it and focus on fishing and the beautiful scenery. We didn't want these strange events to ruin the vibe of the trip. The day came to an end, and I was once again awoken by loud rustling in the forest. I ignored it and went back to bed. When morning arrived, Aaron and I decided to take a break from hiking and spend the day at camp. While eating lunch, Aaron got up to take a piss. He walked over to the tree line, which was close by. It was maybe 20 yards away at most. One thing I feel I need to stress was that he had walked in the opposite direction of where we had initially spotted the tree with red paint. I didn't think anything of it, and continued eating with my back facing the direction where Aaron was peeing. In a shocked voice, Aaron shouted to me, "I found the tree with red paint. It's over here." Immediately after he said this, the forest began to rumble again. It was the same sounds I had been hearing every night. I could hear loud snaps of branches and deafening creaking noise, the kind you hear from large trees swaying in heavy winds. I couldn't see Aaron anymore, and I became concerned, so I started calling out his name. My guess was that the tree couldn't have been far from the tree line, so if he walked into the woods to investigate it, he only would have walked a few feet. He was definitely close by, given the fact that I could hear him. However, as I called out his name, I didn't get a response. I began to panic. I thought maybe a bear or something had attacked him in the woods, and that's what caused the loud noises coming from the forest. But I didn't hear any screaming or cries for help. It's like he vanished. I ran over to where he was, and I couldn't find him anywhere. By now, the loud crashing of branches had reduced to a distant rustling of leaves. I continued calling out his name, but there was nothing. It didn't make sense. How could he go from within earshot to completely gone in less than 30 seconds? My heart was racing. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something was terribly wrong. I began to sprint through the forest, following the sound of distant commotion in the trees. Unfortunately, the dense woods slowed me down, and eventually the forest returned to silence. I ran back to camp, all while screaming out for Aaron. I went to investigate the spot where I last heard him. I thought that if something happened, maybe I could track him by tracing his steps. I walked back to the tree line and found his canteen, which he had laid next to him on the ground. I even found the puddle of pee where he had been doing his business, but that's about it. His footprints were only a couple more feet before coming to an abrupt stop. What made it stranger was that I couldn't even find the tree with red paint. It's a very bright red and it's easy to spot, so if he spotted it while peeing, it must be extremely close by. I circled the area multiple times but found nothing. No tree, no Aaron. In all the confusion, my heart was racing, but I tried to stay calm and called 911. I didn't sleep for the next 72 hours. A search and rescue operation started 30 minutes after I dialed 911. I tried to help as much as I could. I gave a description of Aaron and described where I last saw him and what had occurred just moments before his disappearance. I felt crazy for doing it, but I even brought up the tree and tried to stress that I believed it had something to do with his disappearance. As I expected, the police disregarded the whole tree thing. Under normal circumstances, I would have as well, but something felt deeply wrong in my soul. I don't know what it was, but I know that tree had something to do with Aaron's disappearance. To make matters worse, the couple we had spoken to was also reported missing. Apparently, police estimate that they disappeared just a few hours before Aaron did. They were only reported missing after they didn't show up to a guided hiking session they had scheduled that day. How strange is that? The couple also vanished without a trace. As far as I know, they were the only other people who had a strange encounter with a tree with red paint, and now they are missing as well. After multiple nights, I had to get some sleep. I was at the point of exhaustion. I packed mine and Aaron's things and decided to get a motel room. I wanted to be nearby the forest as the search continued. As of writing this, it's been just over a month since he went missing. So far, all the rescue team has found is one of Aaron's shoes. It was discovered about 15 miles from where he had vanished. Nothing has been recovered from the older couple. I'm still at the motel. I can't find it in me to leave Aaron in those woods. I feel so distraught and angry. I honestly just want an answer as to what happened. None of it makes sense. I can't find any logical explanation as to how or why he vanished. But all I know is that there is something dark in that forest. I know that somehow that tree is connected to all of this. It tears me up inside knowing that Aaron may never come back, and I'll have no rational explanation as to why this happened to him. All I can do now is warn others from experiencing the same fate. If you are out in the woods and you find a tree with red paint, please, for the love of God, turn around and go home. The first thing I remember is the taste of salt water and blood. I awoke to the sensation of one flowing in through my helplessly ajar mouth while the other escaped from the fresh lacerations along my throbbing tongue. As the water entered my chest, I felt my lungs begin to burn, and I quickly forgot all about the bloody ache in my mouth. Powerful, eager waves, fresh from the depths of Poseidon's briny maw, tossed my limp, useless body like an angry child throws around their doll moments before getting placed in timeout. The key difference being that the Lord of the Ocean faces no such punishment for flexing his mighty influence. My arms and legs flailed wildly, as my body tumbled through the water, no longer bound to any whim of my own, but to the suggestion of Poseidon's earth-shaking tantrum. If my body could have properly functioned in all of that chaos, I would have thought he meant to play with me until the end of time. Evidently, though, he grew bored of our game, something I learned in the form of crashing pain as my back slammed against a hard, sandy shore. The blow knocked me unconscious again for another moment, and when I came to, Poseidon, his energy reinvigorated, was already using the mighty tide to pull me back into his domain. In an act of blasphemous defiance, I quickly flipped myself onto my knees, hacking up seawater as I did, and crawled with all my strength up that length of sand. My clothes felt weighed down by iron, and my body, weakened by my recent ordeal, was on the verge of collapse. Harsh, stinging rain lashed across my face as the wind screamed in my ears, telling me to give up. It would all be so much easier if I would just give up. I was certain the raging tide was going to defeat me, but I somehow managed to fight against it long enough to finally escape its grasp. Once free, I crawled another few yards up the beach before I tumbled onto my side in a state of unrivaled exhaustion. I closed my eyes for only a moment, not much longer than a blink, and when I opened them again, the storm had mostly passed. Rain still struck down upon me from the cloudy nighttime sky, but it had largely abated from its early fury, and the raging waves and tide had also grown more placid. The wind no longer howled terrible suggestions into my ear, and the curtain of clouds above broke up just slightly enough to allow some azure moonlight to slip down from the peaceful firmament. I forced myself into a sitting position, a task made almost impossibly difficult due to the weight of my soaked clothes. Though my brief siesta seemed to have given my body back some of its strength, though it had done little for the raging headache that now dominated the space within my skull. Looking around, I found myself in a long stretch of beach, the vast ocean, like onyx glass in the blackness of night, extended before me in one direction. In all others was only shadow and sand. Disoriented, thirsty, and shivering with the cold, I struggled to gather my thoughts while I sat on the frigid stretch of lonely beach. I couldn't remember how I ended up in Poseidon's playground. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't stay there on that beach. Exposed to the rain and the chill, I needed to find shelter as soon as possible. Regaining my bearings would come afterward. With this in mind and suddenly warmed by a fresh determination to escape the elements, I forced my protesting body to its feet. I was immediately hit by a wave of nausea that I was sure would lead to vomiting. My suspicion was quickly proven correct, as I soon found myself doubled over, bile and brine escaping from my open mouth. When my expulsion was over, I stood panting for several long seconds before attempting to spit excess vomit into the sand. My mouth, however, was too dry to conjure any saliva for the wanted action, and so the taste of puke remained. After giving myself a few moments to recover, I took a cautious step forward along the beach. My body screamed with 1,000 years of ache, and my legs felt like melted jelly, but I thankfully didn't seem to be seriously injured. I was lucky, more lucky than I even realized at the time. I only made it a few steps along the beach before I noticed the body. It appeared so suddenly from out of the darkness, seeming to materialize from the very essence of the gloom itself. At first it looked like it may have been an outcropping of rocks, or maybe even a jumble of seaweed, but after a few moments, its true identity became known to me. I scrambled toward the crumpled form with as much haste as I could, clumsily falling to a knee when I reached it. It was lying on the beach with its back to the sky, its face in the cold, wet sand. I reached a pruny hand toward its soggy shoulder, and shook it with what strength I could gather. "Hey," I said. "Hey, wake up." When the figure didn't respond, I decided to flip it onto its back. Upon doing so, I immediately realized two things. The first was that this person, judging by their clothes, was the pilot. The second was that they were dead. I reeled away from the corpse in a sudden tempest of shock and disgust. The body's vacant, watery eyes seemed to follow me as I went. They bulged out of the corpse's bloated head in a way that seemed like they were trying to escape from their home. I was only able to recognize the pilot from their uniform. I never would have been able to identify them based on the state of their corpse, which had already been ravaged by death and the sea in such a relatively short time. The presence of the dead pilot, while disturbing and tragic, at the very least helped me to settle my swimming mind. I remembered that I had been on a last-minute red-eye flight that was on its way over the Atlantic when we suddenly hit a particularly rough patch of turbulence. This apparently was too much to be concerned about, as the pilot, the same one now lying dead in front of me, hadn't seemed worried at all when announcing the possibility of a slightly bumpy flight. That was before the storm appeared. I returned to my feet and looked back in the direction of the ocean's maw, searching for something. The sinking wreckage, some supplies floating in the angry surf, a deployed lifeboat, maybe, but all I could see was more black. It was as if my entire world had been reduced to the inside of an inkwell, in which I was confined for all eternity. Never have I feared the terrible might of the ocean as much as I did in that moment. In the midst of that lashing rain, beneath the alien darkness of the nighttime sky, I suddenly heard a voice calling to me, sounding very far away. I likely wouldn't have even heard it had the storm still been at its worst. I followed the voice with my eyes. Approaching me from farther along the beach was a young woman, who staggered toward me with all the grace and speed that her worn, soaking body could muster. When she finally reached me, she was drained of her energy, and was reduced to heavy panting that prevented her from speaking for some time. "Are you all right?" I asked her, then realized I could provide a more apt question. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head then, finally catching her breath, said, "No, but I need your help. There's a man over here who can't stand. I think he has a broken leg." "Where is he?" "There." She pointed toward the darkness that she had just emerged from, and I immediately understood that I had asked another foolish question. I can't lift him by myself. Please, I need your help. The woman turned and made her way back in the direction from which she had come. I prepared to follow after, but remembering my original purpose for stopping there, offered one final glance at the body of the pilot. Where was once a corpse, now was only sand. The body of the pilot was gone. The woman yelled for me to hurry, knocking away any shock that I might have felt at discovering the pilot's absence. Brushing aside any hesitance, I followed her into the shadows, both of us struggling to make our way along the beach, until we came across another figure lying on the sand. For a moment I thought back to the dead pilot, but the pit this memory formed in my stomach was immediately dispelled when this new figure began to move. He groaned in his agony as he turned to look at me, his face awash with the anguish of his apparent injury. "Ah, thank God," he said. "Please help me. Get me out of here." "It's going to be all right, sir," I said, not knowing if that was true. "Where are you hurt?" "My legs," he yelled. "All right," I said. "We're going to help you, but we need to get you out of the rain first." "There's a cave nearby," the woman said. I saw it further inland. "We can take him there." "All right," I said. "Then we need to move now. I'll get him. You just lead us to that cave." I positioned myself behind the agonized man and wrapped either arm beneath his armpits and up over his shoulders. After signifying to the woman that I was ready, we began our trek through the darkness, her leading the way while I, walking backwards, dragging our companion through the sand. Soon the terrain became more rough as sand transitioned to less agreeable surfaces, and the sounds of his pain began. He groaned and yelled as I dragged his ruinous body across stones and branches and sharp thorns. Our trek seemed to go on for hours, during which my own heavy, exhausted body begged for me to abandon my charge and leave the man to his fate. I barely remember reaching the cave, which seemed to spring up out of the gloom like a waiting tombstone. Once inside, I placed the injured man against one of the cool earthen walls. The relief of losing my burden overwhelmed me so greatly that I too collapsed on the cave floor, my strength completely lost. I intended to only lie there for a brief moment while I recovered some of my energy, but soon the exhaustion that had overtaken me grew far too powerful, and I once again fell unconscious, my mind as dark as the surrounding cave. I awoke to the sound and heat of a crackling fire. I enjoyed its warmth, though inside I possessed a chill that seemingly no flame could ever chase away. When I opened my eyes, I saw the orange glow of the blaze, which rested just beyond the mouth of the cave. Sitting in front of the fire were two silhouettes. Behind them was nighttime darkness. I could see twinkling white stars beyond the figures' heads, indicating that the storm had finally ceased, but not much else. Sitting up required the immense task of ignoring my screaming head. I looked around, taking in my surroundings, while I waited for my mind to stop dancing. The chamber of the cave I was in, well, appearing to be fairly small, extended beyond where the light of the fire could reach. I didn't know how far it went, or what passage were hidden deep within the shadows, but the distant sound of dripping water told me that there was considerably more to the cavern than what I could see. I forced myself to my feet, rising as high as I was able. The low roof of the cave forced me to crouch to about half my full height, and shuffled my way toward the two figures in front of the fire. As I approached, I noticed the injured man lying near the blaze. He appeared to be unconscious, and in the flickering firelight I could see the gentle rise and fall of his chest. He had been stripped to his underwear, and I caught a glimpse of the pair of horrible bruises that covered either of his legs in huge blotches, looking like tattoos of raging hellfire. One of the silhouettes noticed me and turned in my direction. I recognized the look of the young woman, her face dancing in the shadows produced by the blaze. She offered me a concerned smile. "You're awake," she said. "How are you feeling?" "Everything hurts," I said, "but I'm alright." I looked at the unconscious man. "How is he?" "Broken legs." It was the other figure who talked. He was a burly-looking man with a bushy, thick beard of gray that matched the grizzle in his voice. The stranger kept his gaze on the fire as he spoke. "Both of them. Seems alright enough, though. Bones didn't break skin, and no bleeding far as I could see." I failed to suppress a frown. "Can't we do anything for him? Set his bones or something?" "You a doctor?" The stranger looked at me now. His eyes were as frigid as the fire was warm. "Ever set a bone before?" "No," I said sheepishly, answering both questions at once. "Setting bones without knowing what you're doing is dangerous," he said. "Could even be deadly." He gestured to the young woman with his chin. "You can ask the nurse all about that." I looked at her. "You're a nurse?" "Nursing student," she corrected kindly. "Only just finished my first semester. He needs more help than I'm able to provide him." "Then we need to get him out of here," I said. "You a good swimmer?" The stranger asked. I nodded. "I'm good enough." He grunted in some strange affirmation. "Good enough to swim across the Atlantic with him on your back? Because that's the only way you're getting him off this island." "How sure are you that this is even an island?" the nursing student asked. "Sure enough," he said. "Not much else out where we went down, but I suppose we can find out for certain in the morning. I'll look around this place come daylight, try to get an idea of what we're working with here." I looked at the man with the broken legs. "Hopefully he even lasts that long." "He will," the stranger said. His attention was back on the fire now. "Injuries don't seem life-threatening right now. Should be alright so long as we get rescued soon enough." "But who knows how long that could take?" the nursing student asked. "Don't know," he said. "We'll just have to wait and see." His words were less than reassuring, but they proved to be the last we would get from him that night. The stranger stared at the blaze in silence for a short while longer, then laid down in the brush and dirt near where he sat and seemingly fell asleep, his breath soon coming in a series of calm, relaxed snores. The nursing student and I stayed up for a while longer. The conversation between us was brief, with long gaps between words. We exchanged names, although I don't think I ever actually registered hers, and a few other details about ourselves. But besides these few short episodes, we mostly allowed the crackling fire and the distant crashing waves to do the talking. Eventually our conversation turned to the stranger. "Where did he come from?" I asked. My voice dropped to a low whisper. "I don't know," she said. "The storm came to a stop not long after you passed out, and then he kind of just showed up. Didn't even introduce himself. He helped me build the fire and brought our injured friend closer to it, where we looked over him and assessed his injuries." "Strange," I said. "Where was he during the storm?" "He hasn't told me. In fact, he hasn't said anything about himself at all. And that's really had me thinking." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, do you even remember seeing him when we boarded our plane?" "No," I admitted, "but I don't remember seeing you or the injured guy either." I paused. "Why? Do you think he wasn't on our plane or something? How could he possibly be here with us then?" "I don't know," she said again. "I just get the sense that he doesn't belong. It's hard to explain, but I just feel a very uncomfortable energy from him." "Well, we'll keep an eye on him," I said. "He's been helpful enough so far. Could be that he's a little socially awkward is all. Maybe a bit of a loner." "Maybe," she said. "Maybe I'm overly exhausted and I'm just being paranoid, but something about this whole situation, this whole place, just feels wrong." "Wrong how?" I asked. You've been out cold for a little while, so maybe you just don't feel it yet, but I do. I just can't shake the feeling like we aren't welcome here. Like there's something watching us from the darkness, waiting for us to let our guard down, and I can't help but feel like he is a part of it. We both glanced in the direction of the sleeping stranger, then back to each other. Maybe I'll go with him when he gets the lay of the land tomorrow, she said. Try to get some information out of him, see if his story checks out. Let me go, I said. Our injured friend will need a medical professional to look after him. I told you, I've barely got 1 semester of nursing school under my belt, she said. I offered her a tired smile. That's still more experience than I have. I guess you're right, she said, returning the smile. Fine, but be careful around him, all right? There's no telling what he'll do when the two of you are alone together. She and I took turns staying on watch that night, my time spent awake, watching the darkness beyond our camp. Helped me to understand what she had meant when she said that something was off about our new home. Something definitely felt sinister about the place. Something that, even thinking back on it now, sends a chill racing all over my body. At the time, I figured it was possible the young woman's words had placed this sensation into my mind. But as I sat near the fire on watch, I couldn't help but feel like there was something, or some things, watching us. Watching me. From the heavy darkness. The nearby shore, the surrounding trees, even the depths of the cave where the water dripped into the abyss. Wherever there was an absence of light, there was an abundance of eyes, and they all were turned in the same direction. The stranger and our injured companion didn't stir for the rest of the night, until the coming of dawn when the former seemed to rise like clockwork. At the first trickle of sunlight, I was on watch when he awoke. He sat up with an almost inhuman roboticness that made my skin want to crawl right off of my body. Maybe the nursing student was right, I thought. Maybe something was wrong with the stranger. Or maybe her paranoia had infected me too. It was difficult to tell. The young woman and the injured man awoke shortly after, but the latter was in a state of such pain and agony that he was practically incoherent, and drifted between states of consciousness the way parts of our plane surely drifted along the surface of the nearby ocean. The stranger didn't speak for nearly an hour after walking. He sat in his same spot, stoking the fire and resupplying it with fresh kindling, before abruptly standing and saying to nobody in particular, "Going to take a look around, see what I can find." "I'll come with you," I said, perhaps too quickly. He offered me an apathetic look. Would be able to move more quickly on my own. You're also more likely to hurt yourself and not have anybody to come help you, the nursing student said. She knelt next to the semi-conscious injured man and felt his forehead. I could tell by her grimace that he was likely running concerningly warm, despite what his intermittent shivers would have suggested. The stranger thought about this for a moment. "All right, but keep up." I nodded, climbed to my feet with a groan, and offered the nursing student and her patient one final glance before departing into the unknown with the stranger. I had the strangest fear that I would never see either of them again. This fear was later proved to be unfounded, of course. I would still see one of them yet, at the very least. I followed the stranger back to the beach, which looked so much smaller in the morning sunlight. The azure ocean, more inviting than its obsidian counterpart, was still just as imposing in its vastness as its nighttime self, even in the light of day. It was obvious that the endless body of water could easily swallow us whole if it chose to, and I didn't intend to give it a reason to do so. I still saw no sign of the plane wreckage, and figured it had either long since sank to the bottom of the ocean, or had otherwise drifted beyond the gently crashing waves to a point that I could not see with my naked eye. The stranger drew a deep line in the sand with his boot. "Gonna get an idea of how far around this island is. See if we can make a full loop of it in a decent time. He started walking, not waiting for me, and I hustled to square up next to him. Each step through the heavy sand felt like trudging through a dense pool of water to my aching body, but the stranger hardly seemed to notice the extra effort. After that, we'd best head inland and look for a water source. That's most important of all. His words made me realize just how thirsty I was. The creeping pain of dehydration hurt more than any pangs of hunger that I felt. My head pounded with the absence of water. My pulpy, scabbed tongue screamed for mercy. "How long do you think we'll be here?" "Could be days," he said bluntly. "Could be years." Years? The word felt impossible on my swollen tongue. He nodded without looking at me. "Not every missing flight gets found. I heard about a flight filled with college students that went down over this very stretch of the Atlantic a number of years ago. They eventually had to give up the search, probably much more quickly than you'd like to know." I frowned at the thought, but said nothing. When the stranger realized he wouldn't be getting a response, he went on. "If we're going to be here for a while, then we're going to have to trust each other. That means no scheming behind each other's backs." These words brought me to a sudden halt. He did the same and our eyes finally met. To my surprise, there was no anger in the stranger's gaze. In fact, there didn't appear to be much of anything there at all. "I'm good at looking like I'm asleep, ain't I?" I waited a while to respond, not sure what to say. The words I finally chose felt weak, pathetic. "I'm sorry." He nodded and began walking again. I followed his lead. For what it's worth, I do remember seeing you on the flight yesterday. Can't say the same for the other two. Doesn't mean they weren't there, but again, for what it's worth. Are you saying you think they weren't on that flight? What I mean is that we probably have more to worry about than just getting food and water here, he said. I'll give that girl credit. She was right about this place. Something is wrong here. I didn't sleep a wink last night, despite what you may have thought. I was too busy keeping my ears open, too busy listening to all the strange sounds in the darkness, many of which you may have even missed. I felt that presence, felt its eyes on me. There was something out there, beyond the light of our fire, and it was watching us, make no mistake about it. An animal? I asked. He shook his head. We didn't speak much after that. We completed our loop in less than 30 minutes and confirmed that we were, in fact, on an island. Besides a brief few yards where we had to walk along the thicket, the beach remained uninterrupted, allowing for a straightforward journey along our circle. When we reached his line in the sand, the stranger stopped and looked at me. Well, that settles that. Next, we need to look for something to drink. A stream, some coconuts, anything. I heard some dripping water coming from somewhere in the cave, I said. I did too, he said, and I didn't like the sound of it. He didn't elaborate on what he meant. We doubled back and entered a less dense section of the thicket, searching for food, water, anything that could help sustain us. It was dark beneath that heavy crown of trees. The gloom made me think of the obsidian ocean the night before. I was suddenly reminded of the dead pilot, who had once lay sprawled out in the cold, wet sand before vanishing in an instant. I hadn't thought back to that moment since coming to the injured man's aid, but the memory had managed to conjure itself from the great, suffocating darkness and force its way back into my troubled mind. I considered mentioning what I had seen to the stranger, but thought better of it. To verbally recall such a wicked occurrence felt dangerous in a place such as this. The stranger led me past tree trunks and over top tangled roots, deeper and deeper into that arboreal labyrinth, until I could no longer see the beach through all the foliage. I tried not to show my hesitation in following the man, but in truth, I still struggled to trust him. Part of me wondered if he was luring me into that sinister collection of trees and earth, so that he could do to me what he had already done to the pilot's soaked, decaying corpse. I did my best to banish this thought, but it lingered. acting as a barrier between the stranger and me that kept me from straying too close to him. The world around me grew dark as the sun above us vanished. We seemed to walk for hours, though I knew this couldn't have been possible. The island wasn't large enough for us to penetrate its inland for longer than a quarter of an hour at most. If we kept on how we were, we'd eventually make it to the opposite beach from where we had started. I knew this to be true. It simply had to be. Except it wasn't. We kept going and going for countless minutes, hours, days, never finding the other end of the thicket. Darkness further enveloped us, obscuring our vision and thus our ability to perform our task, our entire reason for entering the forest in the first place. I could barely see the stranger in front of me, his form becoming more and more obscured by shadow with each step forward. I told him we needed to turn back, to find our way out of the forest. He remained deaf to my words. A sudden snapping of a twig stole my attention. I turned in its direction for the briefest of moments, imagining that my gaze reached its destination. It would be greeted by some dark, sinister form lurking in the shadows. When I saw nothing but more tree trunks and blackness, I cautiously returned my attention to the man leading me through the thicket. In that brief moment, the stranger had managed to disappear. "Sir?" I called, realizing I had never learned his name. My own voice sounded far away, muffled, as if the gloom itself were choking me. "Sir, where are you?" Swirling darkness, sounds of shuffling in the brush, the growing, thickening sense that stepping into this wood was a mistake. The thought that at any moment the thing stalking me, the presence that had been watching me since the previous night, was preparing to strike. I imagined the deep Stygian tide squirming up from the ocean and pulling the pilot into the frigid depths, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that those same watery tendrils were coming toward me now, winding through the trees on their way to me, ready to drag me kicking and screaming and swallowing brine back to the waiting abyss. I grew dizzy. My vision became darker, merging with the gloom. Something was coming. Something was here. I felt a firm hand on my shoulder. Snapping out of my own panicked bubble, I turned and saw the stranger, his stern eyes looking at me through the gloom. He had somehow gotten behind me, or I had somehow gotten ahead of him. "This is useless," he said. "We can't see a thing in this place. Come on, let's get out of here." It took us barely a minute to find our way back to the section of beach that we had just stepped away from. Coming out into the sunshine, catching my breath and taking in that crisp ocean air, I thought that the worst of my ordeal was over. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't possibly have realized, was that it was only just beginning. I wanted to ask the stranger if he'd experienced the same overwhelming sensation that I had while in the forest, but I was afraid of his answer. As it turned out, I wouldn't have to be the one to broach the subject. We'd only walked a handful of steps before the stranger stopped us in our tracks and looked at me. I felt it too. I frowned at him. "Felt what?" "That presence," he said. "There, among the trees. It was the same presence that watched us all through the night. There's evil on this island with us. This much I believe without a shadow of a doubt." "What do you think it is?" "I haven't a clue," he said, "and I'm not sure I want to know." The camp was deserted, the fire in shambles. A few long, smoldering branches scattered about the place were all that remained of the blaze, save for the pitiful smoke which billowed up from the gray ashes in the center of the old pit. The nursing student was gone, and, even more strangely, so was the injured man. I called out for our lost companions, but received no response. "What happened here?" I said. "Where could they have gone?" The stranger, who stood closer to the mouth of the cave, looked deep into the darkness of the cavern. I stepped closer and followed his gaze. Though the black curtain beyond the mouth was impenetrable by human eyes, my ears caught the sound of a distant, familiar voice, one screaming in agony over his broken legs. "How'd he get in there?" I asked. "How else does a man with 2 broken legs get anywhere?" he said. "He certainly didn't move there himself." "You mean it took him there?" I said. He nodded, "And I think it'll take us too, if we let it." I looked into the darkness of the cave, then back to my companion. "We have to go help him." "Nothing we can do for him now," the stranger said. "That thing wants you to go after him, so it can get you alone too. Then you'll end up just like him." I listened to the injured man's cries of agony continuing to echo from somewhere deep within the cave. "But we can't just leave him in there." "We can," the stranger said. "Hell, I doubt if that's even his real voice." He picked up one of the smoldering branches. "That poor fella is likely already gone by now." "What are you going to do with that?" "Only thing I can do now," he said. "Gonna burn this whole place to the ground and pray that the fire is enough to purge the evil that rots here, or at the very least, keeps it contained to that cave." I looked at him, then once again turned my eyes back to the wailing cave. After another moment, I picked up one of the smoldering branches and turned toward the cavern's waiting lips. "I have to go after him." "You'll die," the stranger said plainly. "Die or worse. But I won't stop you." These were the last words I ever heard from him. Without looking back, I blew on my smoldering branch in order to reignite some of its flame, ducked into the shallow mouth of the cave, and allowed the darkness to take me. My makeshift torch did little to light the way ahead, and so I was forced to use the injured man's agonized cries to guide me through the squirming, smothering darkness. I thought about the presence. How long had it been on this island? Centuries? Eternities? Some time immemorial, just waiting for poor castaways like us to arrive on its demonic shores. I couldn't ever know, nor was I sure I even wanted to. I understood that the stranger was right about this most likely being a trap. I was almost certainly shuffling toward my own death, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back around. I had to know for sure whether the injured man was down there. If I abandoned him without knowing the truth, it would have haunted me for the rest of my life, as long or as short as that was meant to be. The injured man's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes it seemed suddenly to grow louder, then just as quickly fade away. Soon it disappeared entirely, replaced by the sound of dripping water, which was itself replaced by the sound of a small, flowing stream. By now I was certain that the injured man wasn't actually down there, but I couldn't turn back. The presence was guiding me forward. The only reason it allowed me to continue on was because I was choosing to bend to its whim. To defy it would surely only bring about my premature doom. I saw the stream of water, which looked to flow out from a nearby wall, only to quickly disappear beyond my torch's glow, back into the waiting gloom. A silhouette crouched there, greedily drinking from the stream. As I drew within arm's length of the running water, I realized the silhouette had become, or it always was, my own shadow. Doing what I so desperately wished I could do. I suddenly forgot all about the injured man and his agonized cries. I forgot about wanting to leave that cave, about wanting to go home. All I could focus on was the insatiable desire to quench my thirst. The cool, rushing water beckoned my parched lips, sang to my crumbling tongue like a siren. I leaned closer, answering its sweet call, until I could feel its racing chill right in front of my face. All I had to do was lean just a little bit farther. But then I stopped. Something inside of me, something small but mighty, told me that I couldn't drink that water. It told me that I needed to get as far away from that stream as I possibly could. Heeding this inner voice, I sat up, pulling my face away from the stream with great, almost insurmountable difficulty, only to have it shoved back down, directly into the rushing deluge. The torch fell from my grip as my face slammed into the earthen surface beneath the waiting water. I heard the nursing student's whispering voice in my ear, telling me to open my mouth, to suckle from the vitality of the stream. I fought to keep my dry, crackled lips shut against the antagonizing flow for as long as I could, but soon the voice's suggestion, or maybe even my own, forced those same lips open and allowed the water to enter me freely. Its cool, soothing touch ran over my teeth and embraced my aching tongue. I sat there, my face pressed against the stream for close to 30 seconds, sure that my fate was to drown there in the dark, my body no longer my own. But then I felt the pressure against my skull lessen, and I managed to pull away. I sat there, soaking wet and gasping, for only a few short moments before I snatched up my torch, still barely alive with its red glow, and rushed away from the stream, back in the direction that I thought I had come from. I heard the woman's voice telling me to wait, but I ignored her. I just kept going, kept fighting my way through the dark, slicing through the shadows with my torch like a scythe through wheat. It was already dusk when I finally emerged from the cave. Hours somehow had passed while I was deep within the bowels of the island. I stood up and rushed past the remnants of the fire, calling for the stranger, asking him where he was. It wasn't until I found his own branch lying in the brush, no longer smoldering but dead and cold, that I understood his fate. And yet still I called for him. "Sir," I said, "where are you?" "Gone." I turned around at the sound of the nursing student's voice. She was in the mouth of the cave, her body having found a way to stand fully upright, despite the aperture only providing enough space for her to crouch. When she saw that I saw her, she smiled kindly at me. Or perhaps he was never there to begin with. I stared at her for several long seconds. I had so many burning questions that I wanted to ask her, but no voice with which to ask them, and so I remembered some of the stranger's final words, and did the only thing I thought I could. I threw my torch into the nearby brush, and I watched the fresh blaze grow. I looked back at the nursing student. I expected her to recoil back into the cave, cursing in some ancient, furious language as the inferno began to consume the surrounding foliage. Instead, she just looked at me and continued to smile. It wasn't a sinister smile. Her lips didn't curl away from impossibly long, sharp fangs or twist into a devastating smirk. It was the subtle, close-lipped smile that you offer a stranger who you lock eyes with, while you both wait for your drink at a coffee shop. At the time, I didn't understand what she had to smile about, but I do now. She was smiling because she had won. The island was swallowed by the flame. Its bright blaze attracted the attention of a nearby fishing barge, which made its way to the unintended beacon, thus coming to my rescue. I stood on the ship watching the island disappear behind us, its all-consuming inferno visible for hours, before finally falling out of sight. The authorities found no sign of anybody else surviving that plane crash. As far as they understood it, I was the only person to make it to that island alive. An act of God, they said. I might have called it something else. With great difficulty, I returned to my normal life, and in the coming weeks, I thought that everything had gone back to how it was supposed to be. I thought I was free from whatever it was that tormented me on that island. I thought it was gone forever. But I was wrong. I started feeling that presence, that evil, rising up inside of me just a few days ago. It whispers in my ear while I try to sleep, torments me in my dreams. I had thought I'd escaped its terrible grasp, but I realize now that it had purposely let me go. It had let me go because it knew I was taking it with me. I can't help but think it would have been better if I had just died in that plane crash, had I simply perished like all the others. The presence would still be trapped on that island. It haunts me even now, as I struggle to write these final words. I feel it slithering down my throat and coiling in my stomach like some otherworldly parasite, or like a cold, flowing stream of water. Thanks to me, the presence from the island has escaped from its eternal prison. It's inside of me now, and I don't think it intends to stay there for long. My name is Thomas. I'm 34. I live in a one-bedroom flat on the edge of the city, and I've spent the last 9 years processing claims at Sentinel Insurance. Cubicle 14B, 4th floor. The beige carpet still smells faintly of burnt coffee, no matter how many times they clean it. The job is exactly as exciting as it sounds. I scan forms, check boxes, forward to compliance. I wear the same gray trousers every Monday. I eat the same limp ham sandwich at 12:13, even though the bread gets stuck to the roof of my mouth. The clock above the break room sink runs 3 minutes fast, and we've all silently agreed never to mention it. Nothing ever changed. That was the comfort. Until last Tuesday. I arrived at 8:47 like always, nodded at Petra from accounting. She never nods back, and dropped into my chair. My monitor was already on. Someone must have logged me in already. On the screen was a new email, new subject, sender, compliance.sentinel. Effective immediately. All employees will now report their dreams to the 7th floor. Failure to comply will result in retroactive non-existence. Thank you for your continued cooperation. I laughed once. A short, ugly bark that made the guy in 14C glance over. I deleted it, checked trash, sent items, server log, gone. Fine. Corporate spam gets weirder every quarter. At 9:15, the printer in the corner started spitting paper. Not forms, blank sheets. Hundreds. Maybe 1,000. Each one had a single line typed in the exact font we use for policies. You already dreamed this. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I dropped half the stack and had to crawl under the desk, smelling that old carpet mixed with something sour, like the inside of my gym bag after I stopped going. I fed them into the shredder. It made a wet chewing sound, then died from a soft pop. When I sat back down, the email was back. Subject now, Thomas L. Dream report due. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? The building is gaslighting me? Petra was staring at her screen with her usual dead expression, but her hands weren't moving, just resting there, like she'd forgotten fingers had a purpose. By lunch, the absurdity had settled in my chest like a second, heavier heartbeat. I took the elevator to the 7th floor. The button hadn't existed yesterday. Now it glowed a soft, embarrassed red, like it knew it shouldn't be there. The doors opened onto a hallway that looked exactly like mine, except the carpet was soaked. Not damp, but wet. My shoes made this pathetic squelching sound with every step. I stood there for a weirdly long time. It reminded me of stepping in dog crap on the way to my dad's funeral, and then sitting through the whole service smelling like it while everyone hugged me. At the far end was one door. Golden plaque. Dream compliance. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. It turned, and I stepped into my own cubicle. Same coffee stain, same photo of my ex-wife I keep forgetting to throw away. Only I was already sitting there. The other me looked up, smiling the way I smile when I'm pretending everything is fine, and said, "You're late with your report." I bolted, heart hammering, breathing loud in my own ears, shoes squelching all the way back to the elevator. The hallway walls started to look soft, like they might cave in. Then suddenly I was back on 4, standing in front of the printer. It was printing my childhood bedroom, one sheet at a time, blue wallpaper with sailboats, the crack in the ceiling, the stupid nightlight I was ashamed to still need at 9. I just stood there watching the pages come out, For a long time, didn't move, didn't speak, just let the warm paper pile up against my shoes. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony smoking the last 3 cigarettes I swore I'd quit, prying a little but mostly just staring while the city lights blinked in perfect unison, like they were all breathing together. I kept thinking about how my ex said I lived like a ghost who was scared of his own apartment. She was probably right. Wednesday, everything got worse. Every meeting now had an extra chair. No one sat in it, but the chair was always warm. During the 10 a.m. sync, my boss, Mr. Heller, announced that quarterly targets were adjusted upward by 300%. He said it while staring at the empty chair like it was taking notes. Then, without turning his head, he asked me, "Have you filed your non-existence paperwork yet, Thomas?" I laughed. He didn't. At 14:30, the lights dimmed until the whole office looked bruised. The air tasted metallic. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the glass for what felt like forever, just breathing fog onto it and wiping it away again and again. Down below, the trams glided in total silence. No tracks, no effort. That's when I felt it. Not a presence exactly, more like the negative space where a presence should be. The office itself had noticed I was still here. Every time I tried to name it, entity, hallucination, breakdown, the thought got gently crossed out and replaced with the next item on my to-do list, like it was erasing my own thoughts. I went back to my desk and typed this dream report with shaking fingers, full of typos I didn't bother fixing. I dreamed the universe was a filing cabinet. One drawer was stuck. Inside it was me, still trying to close it, while my ex yelled at me, and the whole thing smelled like burnt coffee and dog crap. I hit send. The reply came instantly. Approved. Please report to the 7th floor for processing. Now the entire floor was empty. Not abandoned, but erased. Cubicles still there, but all the personal touches gone. No photos, no plants, no half-eaten protein bars. Just perfect, humming nothing. I took the elevator again. This time the button for floor 7 was the only one that worked. The door opened into my childhood bedroom, wallpaper and all. The crack in the ceiling had become a river of stars. The night light was a black sun that somehow still glowed. The other me was waiting on the bed, legs crossed, holding a single sheet of paper. "You're the last one," he said. His voice was mine, but older. The rest filed their non-existence weeks ago. They're happier now. No more sandwiches, no more clocks. I sat down beside him. The mattress didn't sink. "What happens if I don't file?" I asked. He shrugged like it was normal. "Then you keep rolling. Forever. Conscious, aware. The only employee who still shows up." I looked at the paper in my hands. It was blank except for my signature. Already there. Already dry. Outside the window, somehow both my childhood window and the 4th floor office window at once. The city kept breathing. Lights in perfect sync. Trams without tracks. I took the paper, folded it once, and put it in my pocket next to the cigarettes I no longer needed, and I walked out. The elevator is still going down. I can hear it humming. I haven't decided yet whether I'll get off on 4, or keep riding until the doors open onto whatever comes after non-existence. Either way, the report is filed. See you at the 10 a.m. sync.